It sounds completely backwards, though. It sounds as if the more children you have, the higher your tax. So there's no incentive to have a family.
A larger number of people are being affected by it, which just sheds light on how difficult and how bad our tax system is, in that it just does not recognise the family. And in terms of the long-term economic outcomes, if you do believe that the outcomes are better where there's parental involvement, it's much better for the economy long term, where you've got these healthy, resilient children. But I think you're also seeing countries like Denmark and Sweden, who've already gone down the, get mums into work early. I think you're starting to see a pushback. I think you're starting to see more and more mums actually saying, this is not what we want. The outcomes are not brilliant for children. If a tax is something that forces you to have to, like, say, go back to work or to be better off without having a husband, I think that is destructive of family.
Yeah, obviously, right? Hi, Anne.
Hi, Tammy.
Thank you very much for agreeing to come on the podcast. Anne and I met more virtually than any other way at the art conference in London last month. And I've been reading up on Mothers at Home Matter, which centers quite a bit on taxation in Britain and how these implicate families. So I'm just going to read a little bit of what you put as a bio on the ARC. So I have that here. Mothers at Home Matter. President of Europe. Anne is president of European Federation of Parents and Carers at Home. Are you still president? Okay.
Yeah, I've just taken over, yeah.
Okay. Wife and mother of 6 sons. So you're a busy lady. Passionate that the role of care is valued and freedom to make the choice to care for one's children is not lost to the next generation. And we'll talk about the aims of Mothers at Home Matter. One of them is to raise awareness on the development needs of very young children. So that's something I'm quite interested in because I have little grandchildren. To raise the self-esteem of mothers and to campaign for a level playing field in taxation and childcare so that parents have a real choice as to how they care. And I think that is something that people don't really have a lot of knowledge about. So I think it'll be very, very helpful. Anyway, I don't want to take too long talking myself, but that's just a little introduction of what things are you're concerned with, and maybe we could go into you talking about how you became president, I guess, and what the aims are and the principles are of your organization.
Well, I was aware of the organisation for some time, but I don't like to join things because I know that when I do, I get quite heavily involved. But in 2010, our government took away child benefit for people in the higher tax rate. And initially I thought, oh, well, that sounds sort of fair enough. If people are earning high tax, if people are earning more, then they were taking, it was the time of austerity, so they were sort of cutting back in various areas. But there was an unfairness in it. And my friend sort of said to me, Anne, this is really unfair. 2 people earning twice as much still keep their benefit. But if you're if you're a family with one earner, you lose your benefits. It happens to be at 50,000. It was going to be less at the time. And I started to think about it, and I thought, actually, it isn't fair. And not only that, I started to look around me, and my children were in a very normal school, and we had different families from, with different walks of life. But I noticed that what we were able to our lifestyles were very similar. And I just thought, I just wonder what I knew that if you're on the benefit system, you get certain benefits and get help with housing and things. And I just wondered if I looked at what the household income was, how it compares to other people, particularly when you take into account the benefits and tax credits and what it was like if you were on 2 incomes. So I started to look into this, and I wrote to Mothers at Home Matter, and I said, what are you doing about this? This is really important. And the chair wrote back to me and said, well, we need people to come and campaign with us. We're just a voluntary organisation, and come and join us. And I thought, but I thought, well, I've gone and done it now. I've written it. I should really follow through. So I joined, and quite sort of soon after I started really campaigning, and actually just studying the tax system. Started inputting. So there was this calculator which you put in what you earn, or what your husband earns, and it calculates what your disposable income is after tax, after benefits, after the tax credits, so if you get housing allowance. And what I found was that over a really huge range of a wide range of income, so from about sort of 12,000 to about 50, 60,000, the disposable income of a family with children was very, there was very little difference. If you were receiving, I think at the time it was tax credits, now changed to universal credit. If you were able to receive that, the higher your income came, the more you earned, didn't actually mean you were much better off, because the more you earned, the more you were taxed. The more you earned, the benefits got taken back. So actually, over a very large scale of an income range, you actually couldn't earn much more. If you weren't on that system, that was different. But it did mean that the people who were like our family at the time, and lost our child benefit, our allowance, we weren't actually a lot better off than many other people, than quite a few other families. And the government they basically brought in this change, saying that it was only going to affect the top 15% of families, the top 15% in the income distribution. But when I looked at it, it just wasn't the case. It was affecting a lot of families much lower down the income distribution. And if you were both working, you could earn up to £100,000 and keep your child benefit. So that's how I came into it. And I started to realise that actually tax plays a big part on what you're able to do and what you're not able to do, and how I particularly looked at the single earner family, the traditional model, although it affected single parents as well. I mean, it was a lot better to be single than a couple by about £12,000.
Isn't that something?
It's crazy, really crazy. And I worked out that for our family, we would be better off with my husband reducing his income by £15,000, which is crazy. I mean, we didn't do that because it's absurd. But I realised that we would be better by reducing his income, me keeping the child benefit, and then going on to the tax credit system. But that would, we didn't do that. But those sort of things I just wasn't aware of. And
why do you think it's set up like that? When did they set it up like that?
It started in 1990 when they changed our tax system from taxing the household as a unit, as a family unit with mother and father and children, taking into account the dependent nature of a family, to taxing it as individuals. And it was necessary to reform the tax system because it was quite archaic, but they threw the baby out with the bathwater. With the new taxation system, it didn't recognise the dependencies of having children, of having a wife who doesn't work, and therefore it became much more tax efficient for two people to work, because you get two tax allowances. You don't reach the higher tax threshold until a much higher household income. So both of you can, say, earn up to 50,000 without being taxed at the higher rate.
But if it's a single earner then, and they have 100,000, then they're taxed at a very high rate, and so you still are making the same amount of money. So if you were each using had, yeah.
That's yeah. Mm-hmm. So if you're a husband or a father, or even if you're a wife, if you're the main breadwinner, when you start to earn more to support your family, you start getting hit firstly by the higher tax rate, and now with, like I said, the introduction of this tax charge, the drop of allowance, the child allowance, your tax rate is even higher. So what it did, this tax charge, it created very, very high marginal tax rate. So at the point where you lose your child allowance, for the father to earn more, it's very difficult. So he can be taxed at about 80% if you have 3 children, because you're losing.
80%. Wow.
Yeah, or more, depending on how many children you are. Because if you lose all your child benefit for all your children, it's basically tax. It's a tax charge. It's very complicated.
It sounds completely backwards, though. It sounds as if the more children you have, the higher your tax. So there's no incentive to have a family. There's an opposite. There's an incentive not to have a family.
Yeah, and I don't think it was done on purpose. I don't think that
I don't know.
Um,
It's hard to say, isn't it?
yeah,
I don't know.
but when you kind of point out these anomalies, they say, well, we can't change the tax system because we think
Although they did.
This independent, yeah, is a good thing.
So do you have a voice? Do you have a voice in government? Mothers at Home Matter? Do you guys have a voice?
Not a strong voice. Slowly, we attend lots of meetings. We've got Miriam Cates is a fantastic advocate. She's always pointing out the unfairness of the system.
And she's in the House of Lords, is she? Or
No,
she's an MP?
She's in the House of Commons. Yeah,
right. She's in the House of Commons.
Yeah. More and more people are being affected by this tax charge because of the freezing of the thresholds and with inflation. So a larger number of people are being affected by it, which just sheds light on how difficult and how bad our tax system is, in that it just does not recognise the family. So it's I think it's one of the most unfamily friendly taxation systems, which does nothing for helping raise a flourishing family. It makes it so difficult for parents today.
And so so the government is taking taxes from families, so they're getting income from families if there's a one person who's making the money and one person staying home, then they're taxed quite highly. But if both people are working, if both the mother and the father are working, are the taxes better?
Well, they are on the same household income. So if you take two families, both the household income is 60,000. The family where two are working will have much more disposable income by about, I can't remember exactly, but by about £10,000, because they
£10,000 a month.
No, a year.
A year.
Yeah. But it's significant, about £1,000 a month. But then also all the child policies, all the family friendly policies are all towards going to work. So there's no support for staying at home. There is more and more greater support for going to work, where the childcare is paid for by the state.
Right. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that, because the incentives of mothers to leave the house rather than to stay home with their children.
Yes.
So
definitely.
So what does that look like?
I think it's two things. The narrative is very much you're wasting your time if you're at home.
I see.
You're not working. You're sort of an inactive economic unit.
Right.
The whole narrative when they brought in the support for childcare outside the home was very much that children are barriers to our careers, and they always talk about the burden of childcare.
Oh yeah.
And they don't talk about the joy of childcare. It's always a burden. And now the government have just introduced legislation in March, which from September or April next year, and then September, you will get funding from 9 months if you put your child into daycare to work. So their whole narrative is removing the burdens to work, so that you can contribute to the economy by working.
Yes. So let's talk a little bit about why a mother would stay home with kids that are between 0 and 3 years old. Because you said that there's a big incentive to leave home when the kids are 9 months old. So how is it set up for women to stay home from when the kids are 0 to 3 rather than going out to work? What's the difference between those two scenarios?
To be honest, it's hard both ways, because at the moment it's very difficult for families. I think, many families are struggling with the cost of living.
So just having children at all, yeah.
I think that's a really difficult. It's a really difficult problem. House prices are so high.
Right.
I think many
They are.
families are struggling just with
Yeah.
the cost of living. So I think many people are putting off having children or leaving it later. However, so when you make the decision to what are you going to do when you have a child, it is becoming easier. Well, they're trying to make it easier for you to be able to leave your child in daycare and go out to work. There is no support at all for being there with your child. But you can
Right.
pay somebody else to look after your child, but you can't. There's no
Yeah.
support for you looking after your own child.
Yeah. I remember when my kids were young, in Canada, we thought, if we got divorced, we would have more money than being married and having me stay at home with my kids. We didn't do
Yeah,
it, but and my brother, who's 8 years older than me, so now he's 70. He and his wife had the same conversation when their kids were young.
yeah,
So this has been going on a long
yeah,
time, that women are being incentivized to leave home. But children between 0 and 3, there's a reason that you want to
yeah,
have a primary
yeah.
caregiver at home. And what are
Yeah.
those reasons? Do you talk about that?
Yeah, there are three. There are three main reasons. Children are born neurologically fragile. Their brain isn't developed until 3 years. I think it starts off at about 20% when they're born. They can't regulate their emotions. They do experience stress. And I think the mother is just a very natural, nurturing. You've had the baby within you for 9 months. There's a bond there. It's a very strong bond. I think for many mothers, it's very painful to have to leave your baby at 9 months. And actually, at 9 months, and it's a well-known phenomenon, the separation anxiety kicks in at about 9 months, where they start to realise that you're gone, and that does cause stress within a baby. So mothers regulate the child's emotions, and they buffer the baby from stress. And I think, the way you are, the way you react, the way you look at your child, the way when they fall down, the way you look at them and you say, "Oh, come on, up you get," that all of that sort of nurtures them and nourishes them. And to have to leave at 9 months from being there is painful for you, for the mother, and for the child.
I've read that, and I know there's probably some children who are more vulnerable than others. If a
Yeah,
child maybe is very, very extroverted and emotionally stable, maybe the separation of their mother to a daycare won't be as traumatic. But I think that if there's neurological changes that happen, like their stress levels go up, right? So their cortisol levels go up, and they're
yeah,
finding now that later in life, in adolescence, those kids suffer more from anxiety and depression because they haven't been attached properly in those first 0 to 3 years. And if there's a primary caregiver at home for those first 3 years, they have a very good attachment. And so when they have loss, they respond to that in an appropriate manner rather than in a traumatic manner. And so there's
yeah,
definitely a reason for mothers or fathers to stay home with their children for those
yeah,
first 3 years, and for the kids to be at home.
yeah. And I think the real difficulty is, you know whether your child can cope in daycare or not. I think, and I think girls actually cope better than boys. But the problem is when you can't do anything about it, because you're stuck. There's always a choice, but it can be a very difficult choice. But I think, not having the freedom to be able to be there, because either of economics or what society thinks, I think that we've really got to change both the narrative, and we've got to change the support for parents so that there is a choice
I
that they can
read
respond.
I
Yeah.
read in your report that 88% of women said that if they weren't under financial strain, they would have stayed home with their children. That's very
Yeah,
high.
but for when the children are under 4,
Yeah,
so there are a percentage of mothers who would prefer to be out at work, but the majority of mothers are saying when their children are really little, not that they'd like to stay home full time, but they would like to be at home more.
right,
They'd rather work less and be home more with their
right,
babies and young children.
right.
But it never gets reported in the media at all. It's always the other way around. It's always 50% of stay-at-home mums want to be out at work. Mums are stuck at home
Stuck
because
at home,
they can't.
yes.
Stuck at home or stuck tied to the kitchen sink
Yeah,
because they
tied
can't
to the
afford
kitchen
childcare.
sink. Yeah, yeah. Dishpan hands.
I know. You're so you're you're, you're
It's such
stuck.
a sentence, jail sentence. Yeah,
But the thing is, actually, where you're in a loving relationship, you're actually freer. You're freer to do what you want. I think you're
absolutely.
freer to be there for your family, or to go out, or to participate in
To
whatever the
practice
community needs.
hospitality,
Yeah,
for people to
that's
come
all sorts
into
of
your
things.
house.
Yeah.
Those are old values, but they're good values that we may have forgotten.
But like I said, the narrative is always looking at a very small percentage of mothers, and it's always highlighted that the ones who want to be working more, and the majority of mothers are never talked about. I mean, I think part of the problem is that there is a great clamour for childcare, but that's partly because that's what people see. They see that they have to work. They see that they can't afford childcare because it is so expensive, and that they need to pay the bills, but all their money is going on childcare. So it is a real problem. But we're not taking a step back and saying, what do you really want? And a lot of mums saying, well, actually, I'd really rather be at home. Um,
Yeah. Well, it's also the nuclear family, right? Because it used to be that grandparents were around
yeah,
or
yeah,
siblings were around, and so then there were aunts and uncles, and that people move a lot now, and they
yeah,
move between cities, between countries, and so then you don't have anybody there who's a natural caregiver for your kids, and so then you turn to daycare as the
yeah.
next option.
Yeah, and I think that the community and the community raising a child, it takes a village is really important.
Yeah,
It is. It
yeah,
can be lonely. The way we set up to do it now, it can be incredibly lonely and incredibly difficult because um, your family aren't there, your friends, unless you have a sort of community like a church community where you do get support. It can
hmm,
be quite isolating, and you're kind of very much doing it on your own. So
yeah. I didn't have any family around. We didn't have any family on either side, but I joined a mother's group. I actually had it was a book club. I joined a book club,
yeah,
and
yeah,
the mothers all had kids about the same age as mine, and so then we started having weekly or maybe twice a week uh, outings together, and so
yeah,
that was good, and that was
yeah,
enough, and that was
yeah,
enough, right? So all you have to do is step out a little bit, and you can
yeah,
find a community.
yeah. I have to
Yeah.
say it has changed even in the time when I started. So my eldest now is 22,
Hmm.
and there were many more mothers around. There
So
aren't so
you,
many.
oh, so
When you go
fewer
to mother
now.
and toddler, yeah, when you go to mother and toddler groups, it's quite often um, au pairs or
Yeah,
nannies, or
yeah,
it's not quite the same community. It is harder.
yeah, yeah. I noticed that. I used to, before I had kids, I worked. Uh, I taught a toddler's activity class, and this was in Montreal, in the more affluent part of the city. So this would have been in the around 1990, and it was almost all au pairs. There were hardly any mothers there, and I was quite surprised. But I hadn't had children yet, so I wasn't aware of anything about the tax system, and being married and staying home and all of that was still unknown to me. But I do remember looking at that and thinking, oh yeah, things have changed since I was a child, when mothers were at home, or at least many, many more mothers were at home.
Yeah.
So yes, I can imagine that there are, well, the incentives to work are so strong.
Mm.
And the thing is, there's plenty of time. I mean, I'm 62.
Yeah.
I may have another 20 years or so of work, and I've been working now uh, since I was 40, I guess, because I stayed home for the first 10 years with my kids. There's lots of time to work. There's lots of time to work. And it's only a very short time that you're at home with little kids.
And what we don't talk about is actually it's a time where it gives you a break in a way to reassess everything and sometimes find something else you're really good at, or something
Right.
else that you kind of love, or children doesn't having children opens your world, doesn't it? It kind of, you become a different person, but you find different talents, and
Mm-hmm.
as you engage in the community, or you find other areas of life. I mean, I think the world opens up. We talk about it closing down, but I think the opposite.
Yeah. I
and
remember one woman I know very well. She was never going to have kids. She was always going to travel. And she had her career, and she traveled with her career, and she loved it. She was adventurous. She had a really, but then, eventually she got to be in her later 30s, really. So it was getting to be a little late for deciding to have children. She decided to have kids, and she went from having a short haircut to growing her hair longer to wearing more feminine clothing, to wearing earrings, and she probably never ever wore much makeup, but it just softened her completely to have gone through the experience of having children and being at home with their kids. And it's beautiful. It's a femininity that came out in her that wouldn't have come out if she wouldn't have taken the leap and become a mother. So
yeah,
I agree with you. I think that it fleshes out who a woman is, and that's that's something I would have never wanted to miss
no,
myself.
not me,
Right?
not me.
Right. I mean,
Absolutely.
I've done
Yeah,
interesting things in myself, but being a mother and being a grandmother, that means the most to me. It means the most.
absolutely. And I don't think you realised before. I wasn't particularly a babies person. My husband
Right.
wanted them before I did.
Yeah.
He's a bit older, and I thought, well, okay. But when my son was born, that just it literally took my breath away.
Right.
I was just wow, and I think there was just something about um, that person is totally reliant on you, and that little being, and I remember, that when they're really little, for me, I know it's not the same for I know some people go through a very, very difficult time, but I think I found moments of real contentment, and it wasn't like it was, you're really tired. It's, you've had a really long, hard day. You've been up all night, but there was just peace. There was something you can't really describe it. It does change you. I think your
Mm-hmm.
heart gets bigger. You go through the highs and the lows. You go through some very difficult times, but I think it makes you a, a better a better person. I don't know, but as you're more empathetic. Empathic rather.
Yeah.
you
Right. Right.
understand you understand people more, and other people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah. I
they
thought
challenge
that
certainly challenge you.
for me, when I had my child, the first child I had, and I had two, I went home to visit my in-laws, and I had this baby with me. We had this baby with us, and we went to the lake to see everyone. Everybody was at the lake, the aunts and uncles, everybody was at the lake, and there was this little baby, and that little baby was the complete focus of everyone's attention. So I brought something to the lake that was the most important part for the family that summer, for the entire summer. And that was really something to experience, to have always come there with good intentions and stuff. But when I brought a baby, it was something else completely,
Yeah.
something magical, really, that I seemed to bring to the lake. And that was a very peaceful moment for me. It was as if I'd done something finally that was worthwhile. That's what it seemed like to me. And so, uh, having the tax system and the narrative work against that, that's, I wouldn't say that that's positive.
No,
No.
no. It's quite disruptive, really. And to deny people that whole experience of motherhood and of being free to be a mother as well. Because when you have to think about trying to get back to work at 6, 7, 8 months, you can't relax into it. You can't enjoy the motherhood in the same way.
When you're home with your child full time, then you have, a rhythm to your life. But if you have to go to work, then you, I remember telling my kids to hurry up to go to school, even when they were at school age, and they have no idea what hurry means. And then I thought, I don't even want to teach them what hurry means, because why would a kid want to know what hurry means? But if you're working and your children are young, they have to learn to hurry.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's one of the I say tragedies of everyone being forced to work so early, that you don't get to relax into motherhood and enjoy it, because it takes time. It takes time, particularly as a new mum, doesn't to work out where you are for a start, and you've got this newborn, and so many of us don't have the training before we become mothers.
Mm-mm.
And so,
I don't think any
just
of us do, really. Mm-hmm.
hardly. And I know that as I've had more children, I've been much more relaxed. But at the beginning, you want to get it right, and it takes time to settle to become comfortable with well, to enjoy it really, and not to worry that anything you do is going to harm your baby, or um,
Mm-hmm.
and to establish breastfeeding, and to actually recover from birth. All of
Mm-hmm.
these things take time. And if you're thinking, well, I've got to go back to work in 6 months, by the time you've got the breastfeeding established, you're having to try and wean them off it. And I don't know about your babies, but mine certainly didn't want to come off very easily. And then you've sort of got this anxiety: is how am I going to get them off, from feeding, and I've got to be out, 8 hours of the day, and there's a lot of anxiety over that. And
Yeah.
some children some babies are fine, some babies are not, and I think it's quite traumatic when it's not, and you're just not given that time to enjoy and to be with your child, and to develop that relationship. And I think that's really sad.
Yeah, isn't that something that a society would be set up against that? That just shows that there's a false narrative that is, you know, all through society, and there's an unconscious understanding that it's more important to make money and to find individual meaning rather than to find the meaning through love and service of your family.
Yeah. And
Right? So
you
really
talked about
strange.
time and magic, but you need the
Mm,
time for the magic to to show itself, because
yeah.
a child's world, like you said, is very slow. Your pace has to slow down considerably, but
Mm-mm.
because it does, and it allows time to see the magic. You forget. You see the wonderful spider's web again, and it's it's very small things that bring joy, and sort of this magic and beauty. But you have to slow your world right down to be able to see it, and receive the magic. And when you're trying to get them here, and they're refusing because they will, and they'll always poo at the last minute or be sick or whatever, it just builds up that stress and anxiety. And yeah,
Mm-hmm. I
it's
remember one afternoon, my husband must have come home early from work, and I was taking the kids for a walk, and we got out the door and he said, "How long are we walking for?" And I said, "Well, you know, depends on how things go. And where are we going?" Well, it's like, well, I didn't have a destination. I didn't have a time. He was wanting destination and time because he was in a world of time limits, whereas I was at home with children's time, God's time. Really, I didn't know it at the time, but it was definitely on God's time. And there is no, you can't predict God's time because it's God's time. It's not your time.
Yeah.
I had no idea. I wouldn't have said it that way years and years ago. I would have thought, well, I'm here at the beck and call of my children. That's as deeply as I would have understood it. Now I think, oh yeah, it's a magical time, and it's a time for me to be really present and available.
Yeah.
To benefit from it, and but even when the kids were teenagers, I can remember my son in particular. He was younger than my daughter, on his way probably in grade 9 or something, and I would walk the dog in the morning at the time that he had to leave to catch the bus, and I'd be able to walk with him for maybe 3 blocks. It wasn't very far, and he would tell me some plans or something, or maybe something that happened the day before, or something he was nervous about that day. But if you're working, I would have left when he left, and I wouldn't have had that time.
Yeah.
And it turned out that time was very important, because with teenagers, you have to just be there, because you never know when they'll have the trust to and the focus to share something with you that's meaningful.
I always found that when particularly with teenagers when they came home, that I thought it was really important just to be there when they opened the door, because I just felt like a punch bag. Actually, some days you don't know, you would get this full force of anger or whatever frustration from the day, and sometimes it would be love, and sometimes you just didn't know what was going to come through the door. But they kind of needed to offload something, and then they go off and do their own thing. But it was just kind of, just being there, that they'd know that there was someone to greet them.
Yeah, and I felt the same way. I worked from home. I was a massage therapist, so I had a business at home, but I was there. So I was there for lunch, I was there after school, I was there for dinner. I was just there. And my mom, I was the last of 4. So by the time I got to be school age, she went back to work. But for all my siblings, she was at home the whole time for them, until they were quite advanced in age. And that, even if even if I didn't appreciate everything my mother did or what she was like, she definitely gave us her time, and I'm very grateful for that she did that. And that's something that, in the moment you don't think about, but definitely that's not what they're thinking about at the tax office. Definitely not. So I was going to ask you, there's a rapid widening gap between income and costs of families with children, and upon the ability of families with children to secure a decent living standard. You said that. And then you said 95% of all single people would incur a couple penalty if they married or started to live together as a couple. So it's maybe better off if people, instead of being married, they live apart.
Yeah. I think in England, anyway, there are probably many more couples than there are single people, but on paper there are many more single people, because the moment you come together, you lose your benefits. It's better for you to be apart. You can get your housing benefit.
What kind of benefit do you lose if you come together?
Well, it's just that you're seen as a household income. So if your partner, husband, whatever, is earning anything, you'll have a reduction in what you're allowed in terms of housing allowance, your tax credits and things like that. So it's much better to have almost 2 separate incomes. So you could be on a lower wage, but you can get your housing allowance and all the benefits, and you don't have to have his wage included in in your kind of calculations. Therefore, it becomes worse off when he comes together with you and they see the household income. Then you start losing all these benefits. that's why it's better off to be apart financially. I
Right.
did have a friend, unfortunately, who, like you said, decided to divorce in name, as in because it was better off. Unfortunately, they did end up divorcing, but
Yeah, right. Yeah, you
but
play those games, you don't know what the outcome's going to be. Yeah, it's very interesting because social, in Canada is pretty socialized. We have free Medicare in Canada. Um, so it's a socialized society, and America is less socialized, right? Uh, it's more independent taxation rather than there's no real basket to hold people. And it feels like it'd be good to be held, but it complicates things
yeah,
because then the tax system is in the family.
yeah.
It's
One of,
actually
one of the problems,
separating it or no, or bringing it together, but it's a force, that's for sure.
yeah. I think that unit is really important. That household unit, the family unit. We're not just individuals, and one of the problems is that because the tax system does not support families, or has not done for quite a number of years now, 20, 30 years, we set up, the Gordon Brown, the Labour Party, set up this tax credit system. I can't remember the exact date. I think 1998 or something like that, to support families because the tax system didn't. But the problem is, once you are on this welfare system, it's very, very hard to come off it. So, but half of all our families are on this universal credit, tax credit system. But these very high marginal tax rates means that it's very difficult to earn more to come off it. And now, like, the government are imposing penalties. So once you're receiving benefit, then you are subject to their conditions. And one of the conditions they've just recently introduced is that when the child turns 3, a mother has to work 30 hours or she loses her benefits. So once you're on this system, you're trapped. Really, you haven't got free will. You haven't. I mean, obviously it supports you, but you're not a free agent. The other thing
Right.
that they've done, which I think is terrible, really, is to take away what's called the additional earning threshold. So if you're a couple and on the benefit system, or it's called the universal credit system, your partner or your husband can earn a bit more to allow you to be at home. So he could increase his hours so that you reach the earning threshold to keep your benefits. But now they're saying he can't earn more, he can't work more hours. The mother has to go out to work, so they both have to go out to work for the 30 hours. So they are definitely forcing people in that direction.
Yeah, yeah. Well, definitely that's something that's not conducive to having a family.
And it's much
People
better
aren't going to choose that.
to allow people to keep their own income, to choose what they want to do with it and how they want to live their lives, rather than saying, okay, we'll tax you, we'll take away your money, but give it back to you as a benefit, but then impose
Yeah,
conditions on you as to what you can do with it or how you can live your life.
yeah, yeah. That's kind of what's happening here with Justin Trudeau. He's taking taking it away and giving it back, but it's all just tax money that he's moving around to try to make himself look better.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because they talk about growth, but it's not real growth, is it? So taking it away from an unpaid, so you're caring for your child with love, and you're moving. You're moving that the job, so you're doing the same work, but it's going into a paid transaction. It's being transferred from a home environment to a paid and that it's being outsourced to an external care environment. In the outsourced care, it can be seen as growth because you're paying people's wages as money is exchanging hands. Whereas at home, it's not seen as productivity. It's not seen as economically productive. But it's not real growth. You're doing the same work in both spheres, in both places, but one is seen as growth and one is seen as inactivity.
Yeah, even though what you're doing is caring for someone who's going to grow up to be an adult and be paying taxes of their own. And so you might be doing that for you it was 6 boys, so you're actually raising 6 taxable people for, and that's going to be for 60 years each of them. So that's a huge accomplishment and a huge uh, giving to the society, is to bring up those 6 boys.
Yeah. And in terms of the long-term economic outcomes, if you do believe that the outcomes are better where there's parental involvement, it's much better for the economy long term when you've got these healthy, resilient children than if they've all got anxiety problems because we
Yes.
haven't nurtured them properly, and then then you're having to look after them later on in life. But we're seeing very short-term goals, very short-term. We're looking at it from a very narrow perspective. We're not looking at the whole picture.
How do you think? Do you think there's any way to incentivize mothers to stay home and or even just to have children, get married and have kids?
I think the first step is just to change the narrative, just to tell people that it is a wonderful thing, and it's not the burden and terrible thing that you hear so much about. I remember my son, he must have been about 6 years old. We were listening to Woman's Hour in the car, and he just turned around and said, "Mummy, do mothers really dislike their children so much?"
Oh,
So that must have been the sound that is being put out.
yeah.
And I think if we change that sound, and people realise that it's not such a burdensome thing, and we support families at the same time, and we make it easier for families to raise children. So not only is the work of raising children more highly valued and given the respect and the honour that it deserves, but we also support families somehow financially so that they can survive. I think that's the first step anyway.
Yeah, well, if a mother's staying home in Canada, there is some incentive with income splitting.
Yeah, they have.
I think it's done through RSPs now, which is
Right.
not, I don't think, the best way to do it, but income splitting seems to be something that has always been a possibility. And are they using that there?
No.
No.
I can't see things changing here very quickly. I think it will
No.
be a matter of 20, 30 years. But they do have different policies. So in Germany, Finland, they have a home care allowance. I know in Finland they're fighting to keep it. They're constantly trying to get rid of it. But I think you're also seeing countries like Denmark and Sweden who've already gone down the, get mums into work early. I think you're starting to see a pushback. I think you're starting to see more and more mums actually saying, this is not what we want. The outcomes are not brilliant for children. There's a lot of mental health problems. There's a lot of sickness among mothers, mental health decline amongst mothers as well. And I think you're beginning to see a kind of movement the other way.
Are you familiar with the Hungarian family policies?
A little bit. They are also, if they're actually very good, aren't they? I think there's an allowance even for housing for families. If you're
there is, and there's an allowance for grandmothers or grandparents that their income tax is lowered so that they can take care of their grandchildren.
No, that's great.
And mothers income tax is changed if they have between 1 and 4 children. At 4 children, they don't pay any more
That's right.
income tax, and that's
right.
a tremendous amount. But they are encouraged to put their kids in daycare and get back to work.
Yeah,
they definitely are. But I'm not sure at what age that is.
I think it's later. I think it's more like 3.
Oh, that's good. Yeah,
I think
that's better.
I'll
that's
check,
better.
but I think it's later. But in Poland, it's the same. Once you have 4 children, you don't pay income tax. But I think that's as a mother.
Okay.
So
Well,
that
maybe that's coming. That because I think that they've had that policy in there for at least 10 years, and I saw that I know that their divorce rate has gone down, so I think there's less stress on the marriage financially. because of the break in income tax, or in an income tax for mothers. And the mothers have to be married. They have to be married to a man in order to receive the tax breaks, and that is exclusionary. But I think everything that we've been doing up till now has always been relative. That we think that we can just change our marriage arrangements and there'll be no difference and no trouble from that. There's always an ideal to something, and the ideal is women and men getting married and raising children. That's the ideal. And all of us, none of us ever reach a perfect marriage, because there is no perfect marriage. There's all the challenges that couples have and families have, but still there's an ideal that we can aspire to. And so the Hungarians have defined what that ideal is. And I'm sure they get a lot of pushback against that, but that's what happens when you realize that you haven't had a perfect life, and like none of us do, and that's a tough thing to live with, isn't it? That all of us are striving to be better every day, for trying to deal with our situations better every day. So the Hungarians have done a good job so far, as it looks like it anyway, that of bringing families together, of supporting mothers to have children. That kids before they're 25, I think it is, if they marry young, neither of them pay income tax till they're 25.
Oh, really?
So,
I didn't know that.
so in order to have a baby, if they want to have a baby, they'd be able to afford having a baby easier when they're young.
In Hungary?
Yeah, in Hungary.
I didn't know that.
So it's pretty cool. It's
I
pretty
know
cool.
that they've well, like the rest of the Western world, a birth rate problem. So they've really focused on, haven't they, trying to increase their family and their birth.
Yeah, and I think they've changed that a little bit, but not a lot. But the divorce rate is definitely down, and that's something. Without compel, they haven't compelled it. It's happened naturally, because they took the financial stress off the married couple. So that was interesting to see, and worthwhile doing, I would say.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. So the principles that you guys outline. You have taxation and benefits should not cause the separation of a mother from her child, or a husband from his wife. If a family would have been viable before tax on a single income, tax should not render it unviable. Yeah, well, we have been talking about that, haven't we?
Yeah. So if a tax is something that forces you to have to, like, say, go back to work, or to be better off without having a husband, I think that is destructive of family life. And
Yeah, obviously, right? So we should be able to talk to our representatives in our own constituencies and bring that up with them, because that's just not conducive to having a good family policy.
I mean, our country talks about family-friendly policies, but none of the so-called family-friendly policies are to do anything to do with keeping the family together or supporting the family. It's all to do with getting the mother into paid work. And actually, they say it's good for the family and much better for the economy. Well, we need to be thinking about what's good for the children and what's good for family unity, and for keeping families together and supporting family life. It's just totally the wrong outlook. I mean, we do have a labour shortage in the UK, but I'm sure there are other ways of getting labour other than separating mothers from their babies.
Well, if mothers were encouraged to stay home and have kids, then there would be more people to work, wouldn't there?
Maybe, yeah, in the long run.
Right? You say here, individual earnings are not a good indicator of the prosperity of families. and policy aimed at individuals as responsible for many unsatisfactory and unintended outcomes harming the family. Yes.
Yeah. So basically, if your husband or if you're the main earner and you're on 50,000, a single person on 50,000 will be in the top half of the income distribution. They'll be having a very nice lifestyle. But if you've got a wife dependent on that income and 3 children and a large house, because obviously you need a larger house when you've got 5 people in the house as opposed to 1. Your actual disposable income is not going to be so high. So it's wrong for the government to say you're on 50,000, so you're on a very high income, you're doing okay. They've got to look at the whole household. They've got to look at how many people are dependent on that income, and they do that for benefits. So it's totally wrong of them not to do it for taxation as well. They're lying to the to the populace to say that, and to tax people, to take away child benefit and to take away support for families on a lie that income brings you into the highest part of the population.
Right. So they decide that, say, the father who's working, and so he has a wife and he has kids at home, and the man who's single are making the same amount of money, and they're taxed the same.
They tax the same, yeah, regardless of how many people are dependent on income.
Right. Yeah. Well, that doesn't sound like a smart idea. And so is that one of the policies then that you would be trying to change?
Yeah, I think to focus, if you're going to have tax cuts, to focus it on families, not necessarily for everybody, because there is a limit to what you can do, to restore the family allowances as well. So there used to be, like I said, a transferable allowance. So when a wife gives up her work for a period, and it doesn't have to be even that long, does it?
No.
Then she can transfer her allowance to her partner, husband, or the other way around if the wife is the main earner and the husband's at home. And also, we used to have a system of child allowances. So for every child you had an allowance. So we could bring back that. There's lots of options of what we could do.
So there's no more child. There was a child allowance. So we had something like that as well, monthly, that we would, if we had a child, that we would get a little bit of payment.
Yeah.
And you don't have that anymore?
We don't have the allowance. It got turned into what's called child benefit. But then they started taking it away from some people and not others, which is how I came about joining Mothers to Home Matter.
And they call it a benefit. Yeah.
They call it a benefit, but it's not a benefit. It was a tax allowance, and that's why you have a tax charge on it. It's very, very complicated, and that's
so
why
they give you some money, but they tax it too. Yeah.
The difficulty is they give you the money, but when you start reaching now 50,000, they put a tax charge on it, and by the time you reach 60,000, they've withdrawn it completely. It's just an old and difficult system.
Oh yeah.
I think because it's so complex, it's difficult to change. But it needs changing because it's not fair.
Right. Well, I think yes. Well, we have to keep up with it, otherwise it'll get away on us, and it is getting away. Yeah, and unfair taxes distort people's economic choices away from what they believe is their best interest. Yeah, that's it's so destructive if a tax comes in that turns people away from being together, from forming a family, from having children. The responsibility of the taxation department is huge.
Yeah, the problem is
they see it that way.
They don't see it, and also people don't see it because they don't particularly see that it's a tax system stopping them doing it. They just realise that they can't. They realise that the cost of living is just too high. They don't.
When they brought in car seats for kids, they brought in car seats. You can fit maybe 2 car seats in the back seat of a car. So then, were you thinking of having a third kid? You think,
Yeah.
well, have a third kid. Maybe you have to get a bigger vehicle. I don't know if we can afford a bigger vehicle. Maybe we won't have another child. And they've found, doing the research based on that the number of children's lives that have been saved by car seats is there are fewer children saved than there is children that were not born because they
Oh,
needed
really?
an extra
Wow.
car seat or a bigger
Yeah.
vehicle. Like
Yeah.
it's so complicated when you
Yeah.
put these, and they started car seats. So we got to keep kids safe. So that was the whole impetus of it. And with taxation, we have to make sure everything's fair and equitable. But these changes, they have results that we don't recognize until later.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't really to do with. Well, I suppose it was to do with fairness in terms of women being independent. But I mean, really, it should be a choice. If you want to be taxed as a household, you should be allowed that choice. And then, if you want to be taxed as an individual, that's fine. But we don't really live. Well, some of us live as individuals, but mostly we live as family, as a family unit.
Mm-hmm. Yes, whether we're married or not, right? Because in Canada, I think you have to be married, living together for 2 years, and then you're common law married. So most
Uh,
people who live together they're married, at least legally, and in terms of the taxation system. And then you talk about one group of people should not be pitted against another: mother at home versus mother at work, low income earners against high income earners. Mothers at home should be seen in the context of a life cycle where there's a period of time that they spend at home.
yeah.
And so, yeah, so that makes people have a feeling of unrest then in society if that's what's happening.
Yeah. I mean, when I became chair, I really didn't want to. I wanted to try and ease the mummy wars because that's what the media loved to put out: mothers at
Mm.
home versus mothers at work. But actually, on the ground, it's not like that. You sort of support each other. But I think if there was more of a choice, if people felt more of a choice and
Mm-hmm.
less judged and less, and that they were valued whether they stayed at home or went back to work, I think people may make the choices that they want more.
Yeah, if it's voluntary, right, instead of involuntary.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a
It's a
big
very
difference
sensitive
between
area.
voluntary and involuntary.
Um, it's a very emotional area though, so it's because I suppose mothers who go out to work, they feel anyway that they're being criticised, that they're not looking after their family, whereas those who stay at home feel that they're criticised for being sort of so-called lazy and not contributing to the economy, or letting the sisterhood down, or
Mm-hmm.
not leading a sort of a, a full life. But yeah, I think neither of those are particularly. They're not helpful really.
No, and like you said, you don't stay home for that long, really. When the kids are young, it passes very quickly.
Yeah,
Even with sick kids, you stayed at home while your kids were growing up. How many
yeah.
years were you at home for?
Well, I still basically am, but so my eldest is 22 and my youngest is 8.
Okay.
My home is still base.
Mm-hmm.
I do many things. My husband always said, keep involved in other things as well, because
Mm-hmm.
one day they will go and you will have a you will have a gap.
Yes.
So I was involved in many voluntary things, but and I did work when we needed to. When we were really struggling, I always did something. But and I also have lots of lodgers where I have lots, so that the children all go in a couple of rooms. And yeah, so I have been, and I've been actually really grateful to be able to be available while the older ones went through sort of teenager. And actually the most difficult time I had was when my son was 18. I thought we'd kind of got through it really lightly, but I mean, it did coincide with COVID,
Mm.
but it was a
Yeah, I'm
quite
sure
dark
that made it
period.
worse. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The first year that my son turned 5, and I was going to have, I was going to finally, well, I say finally, because I do enjoy it, but I was going to not have anyone to take care of in a way. Then COVID hit and all 6 were back at home and I was homeschooling. So that was quite tough.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting that. That was
yeah, I bet. And so
yeah.
have your kids done all right since COVID? Because that
Yeah,
was very disruptive. Yeah.
yeah, it was. It was. So my son was going. He was finishing school and he was going to go to university, and it wasn't a good time for him because he had no option of traveling. There was no work for him to do. He decided to go to university, but everything was shut down. The bars, the pubs, they had to basically stay in their rooms. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, it led to other habits which were not so good. And he went through a dark time. And then you feel as a mother, you feel kind of helpless in a way. You do what you can. You're there. Luckily he turned a corner and came through it, but you're never 100% sure. And I suppose you pray, don't you? And you just hope, and you're there when they call.
Yeah. Right.
So that was a difficult time. But on the other hand, we were very lucky because we're a big family. We had each other, and so they had company at home.
Yeah. Another reason for a large family is you never know when you're going to, especially these days, when you're going to be isolated.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully we learned a lesson there.
Hope so. Yeah.
Like a large lesson.
Yeah.
About paying attention to authority.
Yes.
Without question.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah. I wonder if our kids have learned from that experience too, or what they have learned from that experience. I imagine it's not the last lesson that we'll have to attend to. Although the social media can be a confusing platform, there, as you get older, you can use it more wisely. It's hard on kids though. Like, at what age did you let your kids have a
phone,
a cell phone, or even with social media?
Yeah, the oldest was I think 15 when we let him. I have actually let my 13-year-old have one now, but it is tough. It's not easy to navigate. We didn't have computer games in the house until the eldest was 15 or 16. But then you've got to weigh up the fact that they can't play with their friends, but then if everyone does it, then there's nobody for other parents who might want to do, to resist it as well. So my husband says sometimes we've got to stand so my son who's 11, he's turning 12 and he really wants a phone because all his friends have one. And my husband says to him, well, you're saying all your friends have one, but if there's nobody for other parents to say, well, he hasn't got one, therefore you don't all have to have one. It makes it almost impossible not to go that way of everyone having a phone. So my son who's 13 has one, and there's definitely.
Is it a smartphone?
It is, yeah.
It is, yeah.
He's not allowed it all the time. We have it, but yeah, there is a fear of what he might go on and what he might do. I was a little bit blind earlier to one of my elder sons. You kind of, sometimes you're parenting in the dark.
Yeah, well, most of the time. But even now, well, the telephone, the smartphone isn't exactly a phone either. It's just a small computer. And what you can get there is absolutely anything you can think of. So that's really something.
Yeah.
Well, Jonathan Haidt, did you see Jonathan Haidt speak at the art conference? He was on a screen when he was speaking.
Yes, I did, yeah.
Yeah, and he suggested that there are no smartphones until kids are 18. He's very concerned about girls mostly, though, and social media, because there's a lot of comparison between girls and women. Women tend to compare what they look like to each other, and so that's on the phone. That's a very easy place for comparisons and for you to come up short, and so it's tricky, to say the least. It's a tricky thing, and so he suggested flip phones, but I don't know, can you buy a flip phone still? I guess you can.
You can buy old phones. Yeah, I bought my the old Nokia ones, which you can only dial. You can only dial and
I mean, if we had to think back of everything we didn't do perfectly as parents, we'd be thinking back all the time. So we did the best. We did the best we can, and it's a learning experience for parents and for children alike. But it's an adventure as well, right? You can think of it as an adventure, and especially as time goes by and your kids get older, you'll think of it more of it as an adventure. You know, I still look back on it, and but I've come to realize that anything that wasn't done up to my expectations was my own doing, and that I have to forgive myself for that rather than blame anyone else. Is that I'm responsible for the things I did do and the things I didn't do that I thought I should have done. And so, yeah, there's a lot of soul searching. Well, that's why you go to confession, and that's why you pray and stuff, is to have these conversations with the best in you, and to recognize that you fall short, but also that everyone falls short. And there's nothing special about any of us, that we're all falling short and we're doing our best. Yeah. And that's raising kids.
yeah.
There's good lessons there. There's good lessons there that you can't, I don't know if you can learn them any other way than to have children.
No.
Right? You can look at other people's children, but that's just not, or you can have nephews and nieces, and I suppose if you take if you're there all the time, you can learn those lessons. But it's very tricky to learn the lessons of a mother or a father, which are loving someone more than yourself, and giving yourself to your children, but making sure that you also take care of yourself. So there's all of that. And it matures us. It
Let me just put
grows
something in
us up.
front of it.
And doesn't matter what kind of job I've gone and taken, or challenges I've had. Those have been the best
Is that
challenges
okay?
of my life, is having kids. That's why I like to talk about kids on my podcast, and
Okay.
mothers. So in conclusion, you have some policies, or at least questions for the government that you are most concerned with. I think you have about 5 of them here. One of them, end discrimination about parents who stay at home. How would you go about that?
I think just keep talking about the narrative, talking about that children are not burdens, they're not barriers to our career, that
No.
motherhood is joyful, that it is productive, that we're not uneconomic units, that we are working. I think the narrative is that you're not working, you're stuck at home and you're idle. But that's anyone who is at home knows that it's actually quite hard work, and that the work that we do is valuable. It's raising the next generation. We're raising resilient. Well, we're hoping to. We never know. You never quite know, but you're doing your best, aren't you?
Yes.
But the work of raising children is important. The work of nurturing, giving love, caring. And I think, if we start to value caring, I think that will affect not only, mothers and fathers doing the caring, but also, nursery people doing the caring, or caring for the elderly. I don't think that we value care enough in general. So
Well,
I
it's
think
hard because it's not transferable. When you make a product, you can make multiples of products. But when you're caring, you can care about whoever's there, one at a time. And so it's definitely a different commodity than you learn in design, where you're designing products to go out. So yeah, so it's different, and we don't have a good definition maybe of motherhood and staying at home, and the value that it entails for society, because it's so important.
Yeah.
And
I
we
think
can
we
see
do.
things falling apart if we don't stay at home.
Well, if we don't value what we're doing, and I think that as a first step, we need to know why it's so valuable. If you know why it's valuable, then you begin to value it. If you know that you're doing an important job, then you begin to value what you do. And I think it starts from us valuing what we do ourselves
Yeah.
and knowing that it's valuable, and then other people will recognize it too.
Yeah. So having the courage to speak up about it, right?
And,
That shows that we do value it.
and to give others the confidence that they can that what they are doing is valuable, that they can also speak up about it and
Yes.
say, I'm a mother. That's what I do. I'm nurturing my children for a
And I'm
few.
not just a mother.
I'm not just a mother. I do all sorts of things. And Kate Silverton, she was our speaker. She said, so when the next person asks you what you do, you can say you're in the business of brain development. Literally growing a baby's brain when they're very little. And as they get older, and I think within the teenage years as well, it's another really important developmental stage, isn't it? So quite often you're not home all the time, but you're there at crucial times. But yeah, nurturing is really important, and it's
Yeah,
valuable.
you're there doing a pruning. You're doing brain pruning.
Yeah.
And
But
you
I think,
are.
yeah.
And then the other one was recognize family responsibilities within the taxation and benefit system.
Yeah. So this year we're really focusing on campaign, particularly with our election coming up.
Mm-hmm.
So we have challenged all the parties. What are you doing for stay-at-home mothers or fathers? We haven't had any response back, but we will keep campaigning. And I think the more people who hear it, the more people will start saying, yes, well, actually, what are you doing? Why are you only supporting the outsourcing of care? Why are you only supporting families where other people are paid to do the work that you would actually love to do? I think the tragedy is that you're having to pay somebody else to do what you want to do, and you're missing out all those wonderful moments, the first steps, the laughs, the questions, the awe of the world, the magic, as we talked about. And I think people will start questioning more. When we become bolder, I think we've been too defensive up to now, too defensive and too shy to speak about what's good about going home, what's good about mothering.
Yeah, I agree. So treat child benefit in a way which is fair for all families.
Yeah. So take away the injustice where you lose it at half the amount as if when both parents work. I mean, you could remove the whole thing totally. You can either make it universal again, or you make it as the same cut-off point for all families, or you could take it away and reintroduce child allowances again.
But the way it is right now, it's not working.
No.
Include the desire of parents to care for their own children in the debates on affordable childcare.
Yeah. So all the debates at the moment are all about. We want to remove the motherhood penalty. We want to mothers are stuck at home. They want to get back into work. They can't afford childcare. But we need to open that debate. We need to talk about the needs of children, and we need to talk about the desire of many mothers to be there, and fathers. But we focus on mothers.
Mm-hmm. Change the divisive language used, which disregards stay-at-home parents as lazy.
Yeah.
And
so
yeah.
we talk about the narrative. Yeah.
Good Lord, it's not lazy. You're up in the middle of the night and you're up. Yeah, it's like, it's not laziness. It's definitely not laziness. I mean, it can, I guess, if a woman doesn't take herself into consideration as well when she's raising her kids and get what she needs as well, that can cause a rift in the family fabric. But that's something to work on too, is to to have proper respect for your role. Yeah.
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 And
Proper
I think also
respect for the role.
that is just for a short period of time. It's not it's not a it's not a death sentence. It's
No.
a an opportunity for fulfillment and for opening one's life and a new challenge, and you
Yeah.
can go back to
Yeah.
work time. We can go back to the workplace, but
Yeah.
you can't go back to
Those tiny little shoes. You can't go back to those tiny little shoes. Yeah, that's for sure. And those little pants that are only this big, right? You can't go back there. So better to be present and to take the we stayed at home. We couldn't afford any magazines or to go out to dinner for the first number of years, but that didn't matter. No, there was more important work to be done, raising our kids. And it gave my husband, because he was the one who went out to work, when he came home at night, he was grateful to have us there. It was a respite for him to come from a place that was asking so much of him to come home and to have the hospitality of a home. And that is undervalued.
yeah. I think the home is also another really important word and thing we need to relook at, and because it's a place of rest, isn't it? Like you said,
Yeah,
um, to be at home is not to be stuck at home the whole time. It's just a base. It's a base where you can come and be yourself, and to allow your family to be themselves, and
yeah,
to put down whatever they've had to carry in the day. And like you said, the hospitality and um, the warmth, and you can extend that. You start with your family, and then you start extending it, don't you, to the community and into your friends, and people can become part of that bigger family and the home, and
yeah,
it's the starting point, isn't it, really?
yeah. It's definitely, and then it teaches your kids to have uh, the same attitude towards their home when they leave home, about what it is
Yeah,
and how to value it and how to uh, respect the space. Yeah.
yeah. It's a lovely place to be. It's not. Yeah,
Mm-hmm. That's for sure. And there's nothing like visiting where your grandparents live and stuff. Everybody feels a place of that's lived in, and that people are there, and it's a place of comfort
yeah,
to relax in. And so we want that for our families,
yeah,
and that doesn't happen unless you actually take the time to be there and to
yeah,
give it the attention that it needs
yeah.
to
We
make
take
people
we take
comfortable.
a lot of lodgers, and I think they find the same thing, that they're not used to the kind of family and the warmth and I think they really like that, and I suppose that's something you give, but I
Yes.
I never realised how important it was, when people find, I suppose, refuge and strength and uh, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
warmth and from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and it's important. It's more important than we can imagine. It's so important. A place of respite. Everyone needs it. Yeah.
Yeah,
So I think with the work that you're doing is well, obviously I think that it's worthwhile, and it's worth the fight. It's definitely worth the fight. So
yeah.
thank you very much for coming on my podcast.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you for having me.